I am going to say something you probably won't like, and before you tell yourself this story isn't about you. That's usually when it is. I am 92 years old and I wasn't a good man. Not misunderstood, not a product of my time.
Just not good. 10 years ago, when I was 82, I stood alone in a parking lot at night with my phone in my hand. It was cold. I remember that clearly. The screen lit up. The name was there. I let it ring. I watched it stop. I told myself I'd call back in the morning. I didn't. That decision still visits me when the house is quiet. If you're thinking this is going to turn into a sad confession, let me stop you right there. Don't feel sorry for me. If anything, be suspicious. Men like me don't suddenly become honest, without a reason. I ran with gangs when I was young. I collected money that didn't belong to me. Not once, for years. I told people I was helping them stay safe while I emptied their pockets. I cheated when it made life easier. During the war, I learned how to follow orders without asking what they cost other people. Later, when I wore a suit instead of a jacket, I learned that corruption doesn't shout. It smiles and shakes your hand. So if your instinct right now is to shut this off and say, I'm nothing like this man, I understand. I used to say the same thing about people worse than me. I came to this country as an immigrant with a hard head and a simple belief. Strength was survival. Respect came from fear. And fear worked. By the time I was 30, people avoided my eyes. By 40, they didn't say no to me. I told myself that meant I'd won. The war didn't make me cruel. It made cruelty efficient. It taught me how to shut things down inside. Once you learn that, you start using it everywhere. In business, in marriage, in conversations where honesty would slow you down. There was one person who never bought the version of me I sold the world. One. They knew me before the armor, before the habits, before I learned how to turn away when something got uncomfortable. I won't say their name, not because I'm protecting them, because saying it out loud would still mean admitting how easily I dismissed them. I kept choosing deals over dinners, silence over truth, control over closeness. And every time I told myself I was being smart, practical, a survivor. That word covered everything. When I turned 50, something shifted. Not redemption, not guilt, fatigue. I was tired of winning arguments and losing rooms. Tired of being the strongest man nobody leaned on. So I started changing quietly. I stopped taking shortcuts. I paid back what I could. I learned how to sit across from someone without needing to win. But here's what nobody warns you about. You can change late. You can regret honestly. You can even do some good. And still, there are moments that don't reopen. That night, 10 years ago, the phone rang because that one person needed me. Not money, not protection, just presence. And I chose pride. I chose the comfort of staying who I had always been. I thought there would be time. Now I'm 92. And the world has gone very quiet. I'm not telling you this to be forgiven. I'm telling you because somewhere out there, a man my age or younger is about to postpone a conversation. He'll tell himself it's not urgent. That he's tired. That tomorrow makes more sense. That man will believe readiness is wisdom. It isn't. It's how men like me learn too late that being decent doesn't require perfection. It requires showing up when it's inconvenient. And once you realize that some phones never ring again, the first thing I need you to understand is this. The most dangerous moments in a man's life don't look dangerous. They look ordinary. A hallway, a bus stop, a cup of coffee cooling on a table while you tell yourself you'll do the right thing after you handle one more thing first. I'm going to take you to one of those moments now. Not the night my phone rang and I let it die. This one happened long before that, when I still had black hair and a strong back, and I honestly believed my worst choices were just what a man had to do. Picture a narrow apartment in a loud neighborhood. A small kitchen, cheap linoleum, a window that never quite closed, so the winter air always found a way in. I was newly in this country, still learning which words sounded confident and which ones made people hear my accent and decide I was easy to push around. I had a jacket that didn't fit right, 2 pairs of shoes, and a pride that weighed more than my suitcase. That morning, I had a job interview. Nothing fancy, warehouse work, night shift, honest money. The kind of thing a man can build from if he stays patient. I even shaved. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and practiced my name the way Americans said it. Frank. Clean. Simple. Like I belonged. And then there was a knock at the door. It wasn't the landlord. It wasn't a friend. It was a man I barely knew. The kind of man who didn't knock because he was polite. He knocked because he enjoyed making you wait those 2 seconds, just long enough to remind you who was in control. He didn't come in all the way. He leaned in, looked around my little kitchen like he owned it, and said, "You want to stay hungry or you want to get paid today?" That's how it started. Not with a weapon. Not with a dramatic offer. Just a question that sounded like help. If you've never been broke in a strange place, you might think there's always a clean path. There isn't. Not when you're tired and proud and you don't want to call home and admit you're failing. I told myself I'd do one job. One. Just enough to get ahead. Then I'd go straight. I never made it to that interview. I rode in the passenger seat of a car that smelled like cigarettes and cheap cologne, watching the city slide past like a promise I didn't deserve. The man driving talked about collections like it was a normal job. He joked. He told stories. He made it sound harmless. All I had to do was stand there and look serious while he talked. We stopped at a little grocery on a corner. An older man came out the back, wiping his hands on his apron. The driver smiled at him like they were cousins. He said a few soft words I couldn't hear. Then his smile vanished. The older man's shoulders dropped, like someone had taken the air out of him. He opened a small metal box and counted bills with trembling fingers. I remember my stomach turning. Not because I suddenly became moral. Because for a second I saw myself, 10 years older, still being told what to do, still calling it survival. I did nothing. I stood there and looked serious. That's the part men don't like to admit. The beginning of a bad life isn't some big evil act. It's the first time you don't step back when you should. The first time you let another man borrow your silence. Now, you might be waiting for me to tell you I was forced. I wasn't. I could have walked away. I chose not to. I chose the quick money and the feeling that nobody could shove me around anymore. And here's where the romantic part comes in. Because yes, even a man like me had someone who tried to pull him toward the light. Her name was Evelyn. I'm giving you that because she deserves to be remembered as more than the person I hurt. She wasn't young and silly. She was a grown woman with a steady job at a clinic. The kind of woman who paid her bills on time and didn't pretend the world was fair. She had warm eyes and a way of listening that made you feel exposed, like you couldn't hide behind jokes. I met her in the most ordinary place, laundromat, late evening. I was feeding quarters into a machine that kept eating them. I muttered something in my old language, loud enough for the room to hear. She looked up from a folding table and smiled like she'd heard that kind of frustration before. "You're fighting the washer," she said. "You'll lose. They always win." I laughed. It surprised me. I hadn't laughed in weeks. She helped me with the machine, then sat back down, and that should have been the end of it. But I asked her name. Then I asked what she did. Then, because I couldn't help myself, I asked her why she was alone so late. She didn't flirt. She didn't play games. She just said, "Because I'm tired, and this is the only quiet hour I get." That honesty hit me harder than any threat. In my world, everybody was selling something. With her, it felt like she wasn't selling. She was simply there. We talked again the next week. Then the next. Coffee from a paper cup. Small jokes. Nothing dramatic. Just a growing sense that when I spoke to her, I could breathe. But I was already knee-deep in the other life. The crew I'd attached myself to didn't call it a gang. They called it business. They called it community. They called it loyalty. What it really was a circle that got tighter every time you accepted the envelope and told yourself you were still a decent man because you didn't go too far. Evelyn noticed things I tried to keep invisible. The bruised knuckles. The sudden cash. The way I checked the street before I walked into a building. One night, sitting in her car while rain tapped the windshield, She looked at me and said very softly, "Frank, who are you trying to become?" I could have told her the truth, that I was scared, that I felt small in this new country, and I'd found a way to feel large, that I didn't know how to start over without someone laughing at my accent and my empty pockets. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do. I controlled the conversation. I smiled. I said, "Just working. Don't worry about me." Her face didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Like a door didn't slam, just clicked. And that's the choice I want you to feel in your gut. Not my later crimes. Not the war stories. This small moment right here. A good woman offering me a clean hand. And me deciding I'd rather keep my fist closed. Because once you refuse the first lifeline, you start convincing yourself you don't need any. Here's what you should know about Evelyn. She didn't beg. She didn't chase. She gave me one more chance. And she said it plainly. "Come have dinner with me on Sunday," she told me. Not late. Not after whatever you do. Sunday. If you show up, we're real. If you don't, then you're telling me everything I need to know. I said I would. And I meant it, right up until the phone rang the next day with a different invitation. Fast money. Easy work. Just ride along. That night I sat on my bed with my shoes still on, staring at my hands, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Shame. Not the kind that makes you change. The kind that makes you hide. And I'm going to be honest with you, because you deserve honesty if you're still listening. In that moment, I didn't choose Evelyn. I chose the old life again. I told myself I'd make it up to her later. That word, later, was already poisoning me. The worst night of my life started with a folded piece of paper shoved under my door like a dirty secret. No return address. No name. Just one sentence typed crooked like the machine was old or the hands were shaking. "We need to talk. Tonight. Alone." If you've never lived around men who never raise their voice, you might not understand how loud that is. I stood there in my socks, staring at that line, and I knew I was already late to a meeting I hadn't agreed to. And I also knew something else, something that should have stopped me cold. Evelyn was supposed to come over that night. She'd said she'd bring soup because I'd been coughing for days and acting tough about it. She'd said, "Frank, you don't get extra points for suffering in silence." I remember smiling when she said it, like a man pretending he's fine, like a man who still believes he has time to become decent later. I had the note in one hand and her voice in my head, and that was the first choice. It wasn't dramatic. No gun. No sirens. Just a quiet fork in the road. Be the man she thought I could be, or be the man I already was. I told myself, just 1 hour. I'll go, I'll smooth it over, and I'll be back before she knocks. That's what I told myself. I was good at telling myself things. I took the stairs down, not the elevator. I didn't want anyone seeing my face. The air outside had that wet, metallic smell it gets before a storm. I walked 3 blocks to a diner that stayed open late, the kind of place where the coffee tastes burned and nobody asks your business. In the back booth sat the driver for my first collection job, older now, heavier around the eyes. With him was a man I didn't recognize, clean haircut, clean hands, calm smile. He looked like he belonged in an office. That's how it works. The real trouble rarely wears leather. The driver nodded at me like we were old friends. The clean man slid a mug of coffee toward me like we were negotiating a car. "Frank," he said, like he knew me personally. "We like you. You're reliable. You don't talk." Then he said the sentence that changed my life in a way no fight ever did. "We need you to do something small." That word again. Small. The word that ruins men. He explained it in simple terms. There was a new business owner on the corner, a man who didn't want to participate. They wanted me to take a package, walk into the back room, and leave it on the table. No threats. No shouting. Just a message. The kind of message you can pretend you didn't understand. I didn't ask what was in the package. I didn't want to know. I told myself it could be papers. A warning. Nothing that would stain my hands. The driver watched me the way a dog watches a steak. The clean man watched me like a banker watches a signature. "If you don't," he added gently, "we'll find someone else. Someone who might not care where your friend Evelyn works. Or where she parks." He said it like it was weather. Like he was warning me to bring an umbrella. My stomach went tight. That's the moment I should have stood up. That's the moment I should have walked straight to Evelyn and told her everything, even if she hated me. Especially if she hated me. But I didn't. I nodded once, slow, as if I was thinking, as if I still had control. And just like that, I belonged to them a little more. I walked out with the package in a plain brown bag, my heart doing a heavy, stubborn thump against my ribs. I kept telling myself I was protecting her, that I was choosing the lesser evil. Men love that phrase. Lesser evil. It lets you sleep. The corner business was a small auto shop. Fluorescent lights. The smell of rubber and oil. A radio playing low. A man about my age back then, tired eyes, grease on his hands, looked up when I came in. He wasn't afraid. He was just confused. "Can I help you?" he asked, like a normal human being. I could have turned around right there. I could have dropped the bag in the trash and left. Instead, I did what I trained myself to do. I stepped into the back room like I belonged there, set the bag on a table, and walked out without a word. No drama. No scene. Just a quiet act that made the world slightly uglier. When I got back to my apartment, Evelyn had called twice. There was a message waiting. You could hear traffic behind her voice, like she'd stepped outside to speak privately. "Frank," she said, and I could tell she was trying to keep it light, trying not to accuse. "I'm at your door. I'm going to wait a few minutes. Please don't make me feel foolish for caring." I stood there staring at the blinking light on the answering machine, feeling something hot rise up behind my eyes. Not tears. Not yet. Something closer to panic. Because I wanted her comfort, and I also wanted the lie that had become my life. I didn't call her back. I told myself I'd explain in the morning. Later. Always later. The next day, she didn't come to the laundromat. The week after, she still didn't come. I drove by the clinic once, just to see if her car was there. It was. So she wasn't gone. She was just done. And here's where the story turns sharper. Because life has a way of punishing you with timing. A month after that diner meeting, the clean man showed up again, this time not in a booth, but in my hallway. He leaned against the wall like he lived there. "We heard you've been spending time with a certain woman," he said. "We don't like loose ends." My mouth went dry. I said, "Leave her out of it." He smiled like I'd told a joke. "Then do one more small thing." This time it wasn't a package. It was a name. A man they suspected was talking to the police, or to a competitor, or to someone who could hurt business. "You know him," the clean man said. I did know him. Not well, but enough. He was the older guy from the grocery, the one who had counted bills with shaking fingers. He'd started looking sick lately, not physically, just worn down. Like a candle burning too close to the end. They wanted me to confirm where he lived, where he went at night, who he spoke to. "I'm not doing that," I said. And I meant it. I actually felt something like a spine in my back for the first time in years. The clean man's face didn't change. "Frank," he said, "you already did it. You just haven't admitted it to yourself yet." Then he pushed a piece of paper into my hand. A photo. Grainy. Evelyn walking to her car after work, keys in hand. Safe. Unhurt. But the message was clear. They could see her anytime they wanted. I went inside my apartment and sat on the edge of the bed, holding that photo like it was hot. And this is the part one need you to hear, especially if you're a man who prides himself on being steady. I wasn't choosing between right and wrong anymore. I was choosing which wrong I could live with. I could refuse and gamble with her safety. Or I could cooperate and gamble with a stranger's life, a stranger's peace, a stranger's future. I told myself he'll be fine. I told myself they won't really hurt him. I told myself a lot of things. That night, I walked 2 blocks and stood across the street from his building, pretending I was just out for air. I watched him come home with a paper bag of groceries. He looked up once, right at me, like he sensed my eyes. He gave a tired little nod, the way older men do when they recognize another older man. Something in my chest twisted. For a second, I almost walked over and warned him. Then I pictured Evelyn's face at her car, alone in the dark parking lot. And I made my choice. I went back and told the clean man what he wanted. Not everything. Just enough. That's how cowards like me speak. Just enough. 2 days later, Evelyn called me for the first time in weeks. I saw her number and my heart jumped like it used to. I thought, maybe she's forgiven me. Maybe she still cares. I answered on the first ring. Evelyn, I said, and I tried to sound calm, like I hadn't been carrying her name like a stone. There was a pause. Then she said quietly, Frank, I need you to listen. Her voice wasn't angry. That was worse. Someone came to the clinic asking about me, she said. Not a patient. Not family. A man in a nice jacket who smiled too much. My throat went tight. She continued, I don't know what you're involved in. I don't want the details. I just need to know one thing. Another pause. Did you bring this to my door? I could have told her the truth. I could have said, yes, and I'm sorry, and I'm trying to get out, and I was scared. I could have said 100 honest sentences that might have saved something between us. Instead, I reached for the oldest weapon I had. Denial. No, I said. One simple word. Clean. Final. A lie so smooth it almost sounded like peace. There was a long silence on the line, and in that silence, I felt her making her own choice. Then she said, okay. Not okay like forgiveness. Okay like a door locking from the inside. Take care of yourself, Frank, she added, polite as a stranger. And then she hung up. I sat there with the phone against my ear after the call ended, listening to nothing. And for the first time in my life, I understood this ugly truth. I hadn't just done bad things. I had become the kind of man a good woman has to protect herself from. The first time I tried to get out, I didn't do it with a brave speech or a clean break. I did it the way most men try to change when they're scared, quietly, late at night, with my heart pounding like someone was chasing me. I pulled my car behind a closed hardware store, killed the engine, and sat there staring at my hands on the steering wheel. Then I took out a pen and wrote 2 words on the back of an old receipt. I quit. I didn't even know who I was writing it to. That's how deep I was in. So deep I couldn't picture a life without somebody giving me orders. And the crazy part is, I wasn't afraid of them that night as much as I was afraid of myself. Because for the first time, I could feel what I'd become, and it made me sick. You've heard men talk about turning points like they happen all at once. Like a switch flips, and suddenly you're a different person. It's not like that. Not for men like me. For men like me, the change starts as a small irritation you can't scratch. A thought that keeps showing up when you're shaving. A tightness in your chest when you hear someone laugh, and realize you don't remember the last time you laughed without checking the room first. I was past 50 by then. My face had lines that didn't come from smiling. I had money in places that weren't banks. I had favors I could call in. I had a name that made people lower their voices. And none of it tasted like anything. It was just weight. Heavy, constant, and useless in the dark. The thing that finally cracked me wasn't a beating or a police siren. It was a moment so ordinary you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. I walked into a grocery store one evening to pick up coffee and bread, normal stuff, pretend life stuff. I turned down an aisle and saw the older man I'd once watched hand over trembling bills. He was stocking cans now, like he'd been forced to start over. He looked smaller, not weak, just worn down. He lifted his eyes and recognized me. And here's the part one can't forget. He didn't look scared. He looked tired. Like he'd been tired for so long fear didn't even have room in him anymore. He nodded at me the same way he had that night, a quiet nod between men. And I felt something in my stomach drop because I realized I was the reason his life had gotten smaller. Not the only reason, maybe, but a reason. I walked past him and kept going. And the shame followed me like a shadow all the way to the register. I paid for my coffee with cash, because that's what men like me do. We don't like paper trails. We don't like proof. We don't like anything that can be handed back to us later. That night, I drove home and sat in my car outside my building for a long time. I kept thinking about Evelyn's voice on the phone, calm, careful, already halfway gone. Did you bring this to my door? And my one-word answer. No. Smooth. Clean. Final. A lie that sounded like control and felt like poison. I'm telling you this because that's what my life really was. Poison I drank slowly and called it strength. For weeks after that, I started doing small things that looked like improvement on the outside. I stopped taking certain jobs. I avoided certain faces. I paid back small debts that didn't matter to anyone but my conscience. I told myself I was changing, but deep down I knew the truth. I was still trying to change without paying the price. I wanted redemption without discomfort. I wanted to be better without losing the benefits of being bad. Then, one afternoon, I got a letter. Not a threat. Not a bill. A letter. Plain envelope, my address typed neatly. No return name. I opened it with the same careful fingers I used for everything by then, like paper could explode. Inside was a single sheet and a photo. Evelyn, sitting in her car, hands on the wheel, eyes forward. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that made my throat tighten. Under the photo was one line, written in pen. SHE doesn't deserve this. No signature. No warning. Just that. I sat at my kitchen table and stared until the light outside changed. That line did something no threat ever did. It made the situation simple. Not easy. Simple. Because when you're threatened, you can pretend you're forced. When someone hands you the truth, you don't get to hide behind fear. That night, I made a decision that didn't feel heroic. It felt humiliating. I found a pay phone. Yes, an actual pay phone, because I didn't trust my own phone. I called a number I hadn't dialed in years. A man who wasn't a friend, exactly. More like an old contact from a different life, the war life, the kind of life where you learn who stays calm when other men panic. He answered with a grunt, like I was interrupting his dinner. I need advice, I said. He laughed once. From me? I need a way out, I said, without getting someone hurt. The laugh died. There was a pause long enough for me to hear my own breathing. You're late, he said. I know. Who's the someone, he asked. And right there, with my mouth open, I realized something ugly. I wasn't even sure I deserved to say her name. I wasn't sure I deserved to care. But I did. I cared in the way a man cares when he's finally honest, messy, inconvenient, and too late. A woman, I said. Evelyn. Another pause. Then he said, you want out, you stop being useful. That'll get me killed, I said. Maybe, he answered. But it might save her. And that's what you're asking for, isn't it? I hung up and stood there with the receiver in my hand, feeling my knees go weak. Because the truth was, for years I'd been choosing myself and calling it survival. Now I was staring at a choice that would cost me comfort, money, status, everything I'd built out of fear. And the sickest part? My first instinct was to bargain, to look for a loophole, to do it smart. You know what finally pushed me over the edge? Not love, not guilt. A picture of her face and that one sentence. She doesn't deserve this. It hit me like a verdict. Because it wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about whether I could be forgiven. It was about whether I'd keep being the kind of man who leaves damage behind and then acts surprised by the wreckage. So I made my internal choice, the one I'd avoided my whole life. I chose to lose. I chose to be small on purpose. I chose to stop pretending I could control the outcome. The next morning, I walked into a place I hadn't been in years. A church basement where men sat in folding chairs and talked like their pride had finally run out. I didn't go because I believed in miracles. I went because I needed witnesses. Not to my story, to my change. I sat down, listened for a while, then I stood up when it was my turn. My mouth went dry. My hands shook. And that's how I knew it mattered, because for once I wasn't performing strength. My name is Frank, I said. And I've spent most of my life making sure people were afraid of me. Nobody clapped. Nobody gasped. A couple men just nodded, like they'd heard that sentence before in different voices. And right then, sitting back down, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Not relief. Fear. Real fear. Because I understood that trying to become decent doesn't erase what you were. It just puts you in a new kind of danger. The kind where you can't hide behind your old rules anymore. And as I walked out into the daylight, I realized something else that made my stomach turn. If I was finally doing the right thing, it might come at the exact moment it could no longer fix the one thing I'd broken. The last thing in my drawer isn't money or a gun or some dramatic secret. It's a small white envelope with a stamp on it that's been there so long the glue has yellowed. Her name is on the front in my handwriting. Evelyn. The address is old. Maybe she moved. Maybe she didn't. I've never checked, because checking would turn the question into a demand, and I've spent my whole life dodging demands. Tonight, I pulled that envelope out and set it on the table like it was a live thing. And I'm going to tell you the truth about why it's still sealed, because if you're a man who's ever said, "I'll do it tomorrow," you're already closer to me than you want to admit. After I hit 50 and started trying to live less wrong, I did what men like me always do first. I tried to fix my life in private. Quiet apologies. Quiet payments. Quiet good deeds that didn't require anyone to look me in the eye. I went to those folding chair meetings in the church basement. I listened to other men say things out loud that I'd buried for decades. I learned to sit still when my pride wanted to stand up and walk out. I started paying back what I could, not just money, time, effort, small kindnesses that didn't earn me anything. I kept my hands clean. I kept my mouth cleaner. I stopped being useful to the kind of men who had used me. And for a while, it almost felt like a new life. Almost. But here's what nobody tells you about changing late. You don't get a fresh start. You get a slow, honest inventory. You wake up and realize your past is still in the room with you, sitting in the corner like a quiet witness. Some mornings, it's just a heavy feeling. Other mornings, it's a face you can't forget. The older man from the grocery, his tired nod across the street. The way I told the clean man just enough. The photo of Evelyn in her car with that sentence under it. She doesn't deserve this. That line didn't set me free. It sentenced me. Because it made me see that the real damage I'd done wasn't the tough guy stuff I used to brag about in my own head. The real damage was how I trained myself to choose comfort over courage. So I started making different choices. Not clean choices. Costly ones. I cut ties that fed my fear. I took jobs that didn't stroke my ego. I asked for help without turning it into a joke. And once I did that, something surprising happened. The world got quieter. Not peaceful, just quieter. No late-night knocks. No coded invitations. No men with polite smiles. I wasn't important anymore. I used to think that would feel like dying. It didn't. It felt like breathing. And in that quiet, I started hearing a question I'd been avoiding for decades. What do you do when the person you hurt is no longer in reach? Not because they vanished, but because they got wise. Because they learned to lock the door from the inside. I thought about Evelyn the way a thirsty man thinks about water. Not in a romantic, teenage way. In a practical, older man way. The kind of thinking that says, she was the last clean thing I touched, and I left fingerprints anyway. I asked around once, years ago, without being obvious. I heard she'd left the clinic. That's all. No details. No address. And I told myself that was mercy. I told myself it would be selfish to drag my shadow back into her day. That's the excuse I used. It even sounded noble, if you said it slowly. But here's the honest part. I was also afraid. Afraid she'd look at me and feel nothing. Afraid she'd look at me and feel something and hate herself for it. Afraid she'd forgive me, because then I'd have no place to put my guilt. Men like me don't just fear punishment. We fear being seen clearly. A few years after I turned 80, I had a number in my phone labeled only with a letter. Just one letter. I never called it. I kept it like some men keep a bottle they swear they've quit. Not to use it. Just to prove it's there. Then came that night 10 years ago, when my phone rang and I watched it stop. You already know that part. What you don't know is what happened after. I did call back. Not in the morning. Not even that week. Months later. I stood in my kitchen with my hand shaking and dialed the number I'd saved. It rang once. Twice. Then a calm voice answered, not hers. A man. Older than me, maybe. Hello, he said. I couldn't breathe for a second. I said the first thing that came to my mouth. I'm sorry, I said, like an idiot. There was a pause. And then he said, "Who is this?" And that's when I realized my name didn't mean anything here. It didn't carry fear. It didn't carry weight. It was just a sound from a stranger. I said, "Frank," and I didn't give a last name. I never do. He sighed, not angry, tired, like he'd answered too many calls that didn't bring good news. "She's not available," he said. "And she doesn't take calls like this." Then he added very quietly, "If you care about her at all, you won't try again." He didn't threaten me. He didn't insult me. He just laid down a boundary like a decent man. I stood there with the phone in my hand after he hung up, and for the first time I understood what it meant to lose without a fight. That was my chance to push, to demand, to explain, to make it about my pain. Instead, I made the only clean choice I had left. I stopped. I never called again. And that's why the envelope is still sealed. Because every apology I want to send is also a request. Every confession is also a reach. And I don't get to reach into a life I dirted and call it love. So here's my last internal choice, right here in front of you. I can die as the man who finally tells the truth, or I can die as the man who still tries to manage how he's remembered. I'm choosing the truth. I did bad things. I hid behind survival. I used strength like a weapon. And when a good woman asked me, "Did you bring this to my door?" I protected myself with a lie. I changed after 50. Yes. I tried. I did real work. But change doesn't erase the debt. It just stops the interest from growing. If you're listening to me and you're thinking, "At least he became better," I understand that feeling. If you're thinking, "Too little, too late," I understand that too. Both can be true. That's the part most men can't stand. We want a verdict. Guilty or redeemed. Monster or hero. Life doesn't give you that. It gives you a mirror and asks whether you'll look. So I'm asking you man to man, don't wait for the moment that makes decency convenient. Don't call it wisdom when you postpone the hard conversation. That's not wisdom. That's fear wearing a clean shirt. And one day you'll open a drawer and find your own sealed envelope. And you'll realize the cruelest thing about time isn't that it ends. It's that it keeps going without you fixing what mattered.